So welcome to everyone to the inaugural seminar series of the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. This is the first of 5 conversations that are going to happen through this fall, and in the winter we'll have 4 more. I think that those ones in the winter will focus a little more on art, but here we're going to be, this conversation is across disciplines, and I'm really excited to kick it off. To start the series in a way that pays respect to all our relations, to the speakers that have come together today, I invited knowledge keeper 𝙄𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 to add an opening to the series and to launch it in the way that Amy will, and so I'm going to turn it over to you. I really thank you, 𝙄𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙤, for joining us and opening the series in a good way. So over to you, Amy.
𝙄𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙤, thank you, Lisa. Bonjour, everybody. 𝗬𝗏𝗃 𝗏𝗏𝗃 𝗏𝘄ℎ 𝗠𝙀𝙀 𝗏𝑠𝑎𝑘𝑠𝑖𝑛𝑔 𝑑𝑜𝛻𝑚 It's really good to be here. Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me, and thank you to the organizers who are hosting these events over the fall and the winter. I know it's a lot of work to put these together, so I really appreciate the work that's gone into bringing us all together. And thanks to everybody for hanging out with all the technical difficulties. I know it can be kind of stressful for all of us in this weird technical gathering space that we're asked to be in right now during COVID. So this is our new reality. And I think in a lot of ways we have to be more patient than we are used to being in our with the new way that we have to gather. So 𝙤𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙤 for joining us today. As some of the elders and the teachers that I have met over the years and have learned from, and we're exactly where we're meant to be in this moment, right? So with all of the stuff that came before, let's just be here together right now. So 𝙤𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙤. I just wanted to offer some words in the language, and the gathering Lisa was sharing with me before is in Anishinaabemowin, MIIJIM. It refers to food, but it's more than that, as Lisa was explaining, and I'm going to try to do my best to kind of talk about those concepts. I'm not a fluent speaker by any means. I am also learning Anishinaabemowin. But the idea, those sounds, you know, as one of our teachers talks about, Helen Roy says that each one of those sounds, MIIJIM, each one of those sounds has a meaning, right? And as Lisa was talking about before we gathered here, that me in MIIJIM talks about like offering, and it talks about you can hear it in the words miigwech and mikan, the words for thank you and the words for roads. And so it's a lot more than just this idea of food, you know, and when I say that word in English, I guess just get pictures of food in my head, right? For Anishinaabemowin, the idea that the natural world, you know, the animals and the plants and the medicines and the air and the waters and the sky, the sun and the earth herself are relatives. They're spirits in and of themselves, and so we treat them as such, just as you would greet any other being, any other human being, with respect, hopefully, and with greetings. We do the same for our relatives in the natural world, and so a lot of us teachers and knowledge keepers would wake up and we would offer that 𝙄𝑚𝑎, our prayer medicine, to the earth and say 𝐺𝐺𝐺𝑚IIGwech to Mother Earth. And so I want to do that for you while we're here today. And Lisa is offering 𝙄𝑚𝑎 for this gathering from her garden, and so we say 𝐺𝐺𝐺𝑚IIGwech to Lisa for doing that offering. It's really beautiful to get to know that tobacco, that 𝙄𝑚𝑎, from its seed place, and watch it grow and talk to it and have that relationship over the growing season, and then to have that honor of receiving that life energy from the 𝙬𝙤𝙀 as it grew, and to take that and offer it back to the earth as it was meant to be done, you know, in gratitude and thanks for the medicine that has shared over the growing season, and for this gathering, for us to come together like this. So 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 for that work, Lisa. And I say I sit here with my own 𝙬𝙀𝙀 and my miigwech, and I say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀, and I'm going to offer it in English for now, just for ease of communication right now. And I want to say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to 𝗂𝘄𝑚𝑒𝑛 𝑎𝑑𝑜, our great kind mystery, for bringing us all together. And we're going to be of one mind while we're doing this work of giving thanks and gratitude and being here in this moment. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝑚𝑒𝑛 𝗂𝘄𝑚𝑒n𝑛 𝑎𝑑𝑜, great kind mystery, for bringing us together, and for your kindness, and for your kindness of giving us everything that we have needed, that we need, the winds and the waters and the skies and the foods. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you. And we turn our minds to the earth and our mother, and all that live on the earth realm. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀, those little ones, the 𝗦𝗫𝙁s, that live under the earth and do that work, to care for and to look after one another. Those tiny insects, we say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀, and the ones that live in the earth, we say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for all that you do. We bring our greetings and gratitude and thanks to the earth realm and all those beings that are related to her and look after her, our mother. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 especially to Mother Earth for the green and growing season that you have come through, and all the bounty that you have shared with us this fall, this harvest season. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 for all of that great teaching of generosity that you bring to us, that great love that you have for us, your children who partake of your nourishment every growing season. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for that generosity. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to all of the plant nations and the medicine nations that come and offer. You're so kind to your younger brothers and sisters, as human beings, as we are so pitiful that we cannot survive without your generosity. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for offering of your bodies and your spirits, so that we may live. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you, all of our relatives of the earth nation or the earth place. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀. And we turn our minds to the waters, and we say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you, all of the waters of the world. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for all of your kindness and your generosity, for sharing of yourself with us, so that we may live. All those fresh waters that we take into ourselves and that we use to prepare our foods and to prepare our medicines, we say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for your generosity and your kindness, and allowing us to do that in that good way. And we say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀. We ask forgiveness also when we have forgotten how to be taking care of you in that proper way, and we say we ask for that forgiveness. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you, our relatives, the waters. And we turn our minds to the sky realm. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to all those sky beings that make it possible for us to be here, breathing this air and bringing the rains and bringing the nourishment that our animal and our plant relatives need. All the things that you do to bring balance to us. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to all of you, to the grandfathers, our thunders, to our grandfather sun and grandmother moon. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 for you for once again keeping that balance between the earth and the sky realms. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for that work that you do, and may you continue to do that work that Creator has asked you to do. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you, our relatives of the sky realm. And we say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to all of those in the animal, our relatives, animal brothers and sisters. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for all that you do and all that you continue to do, in offering your medicines and your bodies so that we may eat and we may receive that nourishment. All of your sacrifices. These relatives in the natural world are our relatives, the animals and the fishes and the waters and the airs. We say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 to you for doing that work that Creator has asked you to do. We are so pitiful, your siblings, these younger brothers and sisters, that we recognize that we cannot do and we cannot live without you. So we say 𝗤𝙤𝙬𝙀 for all of your kindness and all of your sacrifices and all that you do to continue to maintain this balance in harmony. We say 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤. We say 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 on our relations.
Which, Amy? Okay, that was, really appreciate that opening of our series. And today, I really appreciate what you offer here and like what you've offered us in a way to think about all of our, relations, and in relation to what we're talking about today, MIIJIM, which is not only the food, but everything around it. So my name's Lisa Myers, and I'm an assistant professor here at York University. I'm also an artist and a curator, and I was a cook for many years. And I'm a member of 𝙄𝙤𝙙𝙬𝙬𝙐𝙬 First Nation, and or also known as 𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙬𝙐𝙬. And so I'm really excited. I have to say that I'm not exaggerating. It's kind of a dream to be in conversation with Dawn and Tanya and Sherry. So I'm just going to put that out there first. Today, we're going to hear some presentations from the speakers, which will lead to some questions I have to start a conversation around food relations and Indigenous food sovereignty. Then we're going to open it up to some questions. We were started a bit late, so I do appreciate your patience, but also I just wanted to say that that we will have a little bit of time. We might have to cut off the audience questions, but we'll try to incorporate that. So MIIJIM, Food as Relations, was conceived as the title for this series. And as Amy mentioned, that it's this kind of overarching theme that a language speaker, 𝗄𝘅 who I talked to about this word quite a few years ago, explained to me about that it means, it has a connotation of reciprocity and offering. So this series is about land relations, plants, foods, medicines, pollinators, growers, seed keepers, makers, cooks, humans and other than human, art, ecology, activism, acknowledging systems of knowledge broadly. So in this realm. So I want to start also by thanking all the speakers that are here today. My colleagues, Dana Prieto and Sheila Kola, who contributed and supported the development of this series. And thank you to all my colleagues at EUC, or Environmental and Urban Change, with a special mention of Martha Steegman, who made some amazing suggestions to this panel in particular. And I also want to acknowledge support from EUC, the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change, New Frontiers, and York's Sustainability Innovation Fund for making it possible to bring everyone together. So, and I want to humbly say, as I said, I appreciate the generosity of Dawn, Sherry, and Tanya to be here today in conversation. Today's theme is Indigenous food sovereignties, and I wanted to start the series with this concept and practice as a way to turn our attention to the self-determination of Indigenous peoples, specifically in terms of our food systems. Focusing on culturally suitable food systems, but also how Don Morrison writes about Indigenous food sovereignty being conceptualized with these four pillars: the sacred, participation, how we participate in the food that we have, self-determination, and policy. And I was thinking that this is a place to start in the series, and the coming weeks will show more examples of how self-determination manifests, like thinking about the sessions on learning from Menomin on October 27th, and the session on Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe foods on November 10th. I also wanted to think about how we can how we're in relation to issues of food in broader communities. So the sessions Black and Indigenous food relations on October 20th, and the session Migrant Workers and Food Justice on November 24th. So these are kind of how it all came together, but this is where we're going to start. I'm excited about the presentations and conversations today because I think it will lead us to talking about concepts of food beyond commodity and profit and those sorts of points that we relate to in buying our food at the grocery store. So with this said, I think we can move on to introducing the speakers. Our first speaker is Tanya Willard, 𝙬𝗏𝗪 from Secwepemc Nation works within the shifting ideas of contemporary and traditional as it relates to cultural arts and production, often working with bodies of knowledge and skills that are conceptually linked to her interest in intersections between Aboriginal and other cultures. Willard has worked as a curator in residence with Grunt Gallery and Kamloops Art Gallery. Willard's curatorial work includes Beat Nation, art, hip hop, and Aboriginal culture. A national touring exhibition first presented at Vancouver Art Gallery in 2011. I saw it, I loved it, it was great. As assistant professor in creative studies at UBC Okanagan, that's what the O stands for, Kelowna, BC. Currently, her research focuses on Secwepemc aesthetics, language, land, and interrelated Indigenous art practices. Willard's projects include Bush Gallery, a conceptual space for land-based art and action led by Indigenous artists. Our second speaker will be Dawn Morrison, and Dawn Morrison is the founder and curator of the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty. Her Secwepemc Wadjuk heritage, along with more than 20 years of experience in Indigenous food sovereignty, ecology, horticulture, and ethnobotany, as well as her passion for environmental and cultural revitalization, has led her to a long-lasting career in Aboriginal adult education and community self-development. Since 2000, Dawn has reconnected with her ancestral ties in Secwepemc territory and has since committed to learning and working with elders and traditional hunters, fishers, harvesters to improve the health and well-being of the Secwepemc peoples. And our final speaker today will be Dr. Sherry Pictou, who is a Mi'kmaq woman from 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤. I'm sorry, I should have worked down that before. Community, which means water cuts through high rocks, known as Bear River First Nation, Nova Scotia. She is an assistant professor in the faculties of law and management of Dalhousie University, focusing on Indigenous governance. Dr. Pictou is also a former chief of her community and the former co-chair of the World Forum of Fisher Peoples. She is a member of the IPBES Task Force on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. Her research interests include decolonizing treaty relations, social justice for Indigenous women, Indigenous women's roles in food and lifeways, and Indigenous governance. Wow, okay, what a great lineup. Who thought of this? Okay, we'll start with Tanya, if you want to take it over, Tanya, and share your screen.
Great, okay. Tanya Willard. I just wanted to greet you in my language. I saw not only Dawn, who I'm so honored is here, also from the Nisquamish Secwepemc community and nation, but I saw others saying Cook's-Jam, as well as the Mi'ijIMs in the chat. And so there's some other Secwepemc folks here, so it's great to see you and to share our language. We have time at the end for some conversation, so I'm going to share my screen and show a few images as I talk through. And excuse me one moment, in the interest of time, I also want to just make sure I'm conscious of that. I'm just going to put on 10 minutes on my timer here. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. All right. Well, so I was very honored for Lisa to invite me here today, and I'm speaking from the perspective of my work as an artist. And this is the primary way in which I exercise ideas of Bush Gallery. It's actually the way I approached curating when I was in the past doing a lot more curatorial work. I approached it from the position of an artist, and an artist who's interested in ways in which art can give voice and space to transformative ways of being. And so naturally, in terms of relocating in the last 10 years to my home territories in Secwepemc and building a home and growing garlic, as well as learning about traditional plants and beings here and participating in harvest on our lands, food becomes something that is just enveloped, wrapped in all of the other work that I do. So I wanted to sort of speak about that. And there's ways in which it's woven through my practice or imbricated into the textures and the beingness of the work that I'm doing. So this is an image of a work in process that was finished for the Nanaimo Art Gallery. And I wanted to start with it. It's a laser etching on tanned salmon leather. And I think that all of the impacts, and I'm sure Dawn's incredible work with the Wild Salmon Caravan will also speak to this, but it is such a heartbreaking year, and maybe such a heartbreaking decade for wild salmon. You know, I'm not there doing the work on the kind of level of, like we see with 𝙄𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙠 confronting the fish farms, the current encampments to block the TMX pipeline by Secwepemc defenders, both in Barrier, the tiny house warriors, as well as the recent encampment at Mission Flats into Kamloops in Kamloops, BC, that's protesting the drilling under the river. But I do this in my way that I can, which is through my art practice, and I'm posing this question around what used to be feasting and the importance of that 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, the feast, which has now become a kind of a fast, I think, when it comes to the reality of our wild food products. And they give me such joy and connection. These are 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, huckleberries. I think the king, the queen, the pinnacle of berries. This is some picked from this year up near 𝙄𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, Scotch Creek. And I just, there is such a embodied experience in harvesting from our land that it impacts the ways in which I think about aesthetics, the ways that I think about gallery systems. And I became really interested several years back about shifting the idea of the space of art being the gallery into the gallery really being the land. And I'm invested in this idea of Walter Mignolo and Rolando Vasquez, who gave words to this idea of decolonial aesthesis. And so the experience of art, the experience of culture as integrated and part of the ways in which, for me, I interact on the land. And so these are some harvest of 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 in MIIJIM in birch bark baskets. These are relations to not only my ancestors and the land, but to the next generation in terms of my children and picking huckleberries. And even that is at risk these days. There is a commercial huckleberry harvest as well that happens. And there have been a number of folks, Dr. Janice Billy, Dr. Jeanette Armstrong from the 𝙄𝙤𝙤 Nation, Janice Billy being Secwepemc, who have raised concerns, and people who are using the land, who have raised concerns about the ways in which these are being stripped of all of their berries. And normally when we pick, we leave some. My dad, when we go out, always says, you know, you gotta leave some for the bears and leave some for others. And this is an extension, I think, of that idea of making relations, that we leave some, we don't take everything. We are creating abundance with and for the land, not from the land. And so this is an image thinking again about value. This is a project done for the Toronto Art Biennial with Lisa Myers. And this is an image of some gifting that we did as a Bush Gallery project. It includes canned salmon, salmon from Secwepemc, some from the 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Nation. This project was with Peter Moran, who's a performance artist from the 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Nation. And we created a number of gifts, also small birch bark baskets made by 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤. And they're all resting on top of these money bag quilts. Let me know if I got that wrong, Lisa, that Lisa Myers created in her practice. And we're really thinking about value here. And when we gathered together, we also fed people. It's important when we gather together to feed people in this kind of social practice art. And the experience was really incredible. And we had an exchange, and food was just naturally a part of that, a part of the way we come into other territories, how we interact, and our relationality. So I'll just talk briefly about another project. This was led by Métis artist Gabriel Hill. It was called Coney Island Baby, and it involved making a film at Bush Gallery with Janine Freyna-Jutli and Chandra Melting-Tallow, filmed by Amy Kazmierczuk, curator Amy Kazmierczuk, as well as local Secwepemc photographer and videographer Aaron Leon. And the project was trapping rabbits in my territory, up at Bush Gallery. Originally, it was proposed to be trapping the rabbits that are domestic rabbits that overrun Jericho Park in Vancouver. There was some problems with timeline and working in a way that was more deeply embedded with the Musqueam Nation. And so I invited Gabriel to realize the project at Bush Gallery. And when we show the work for this exhibition, the film that was made and a series of sculptures, we also feed people. And so we ended up not trapping wild rabbits. We ended up actually working with Don Arnoux, who's from 𝙬𝙤𝙀 Adams Lake Reserve. He was at the time raising meat rabbits, and so we would purchase meat rabbits from him and make rabbit stew for people when they came to the exhibition opening. And this was a way that we thought of as both supporting a local Indigenous economy as well as working in ways that centered the importance of food. So this is an example of one of the murals for the work that Gabriel Hill creates in the exhibition. And we served this rabbit stew, which, you know, normally you have to go through some kind of food safety and other bureaucratic processes. Not that food safety is important, right? But there's other kind of bureaucratic processes when you are serving food to people that actually oftentimes leave Indigenous foods out of the ability to kind of serve and host, and that's so critical to our work. So we just went for it, and we served this rabbit stew at the opening. Yeah, life is salmon. We're river people. This is me smoking some salmon, and so this is interspersed. I make my life in 𝙬𝙤𝙙𝙬𝙀𝗀, which is that's the name given to the area up from the hills of 𝙬𝙤𝙀 by 𝙬𝙬𝙀 Lake, or I should say 𝙬𝙤𝙀, named after 𝙄𝙤𝙀 𝙬𝙀𝙀, that was given by Annie Michel, that place name. And so that's just, it's just the rhythm of life, this harvest, and it's not only the rhythm of life, it's the spirit and the heart. And that comes to, when you live a bit more rurally or live in the community, that comes to frame a lot of my experience. And so, of course, is also imbricated into my art practice. My dad last year was successful in harvesting a moose, and I'm very grateful for last winter where I had mostly wild meat. And for my dad, who grew up hunting from a young age, I learned a lot from hearing from him about the change in hunting over time, the ways in which communities have gated and fenced properties where he used to hunt, where his grandfather used to hunt. He was raised by his grandfather, 𝙬𝙀𝙀. And so I am learning to tan this moose hide from the moose that he got back, that he harvested last year. So this is me starting that process. This is an image of some of the wild foods. This is 𝙤𝙤𝙀𝙀𝙀, chocolate lily root, that are just that are prolific in the spring, and I'm surrounded by natural and traditional foods, and I try to learn more about them. I also grow garlic. I work with currently a PAX registered organic garlic, and this is something I came to learn about and do, and so I'm also growing foods within that space. And I just wanted to conclude with an idea here. In Bush Gallery, I use this symbol, or I think about the symbol of a basket. This is a cedar root basket. It's from a Masterworks exhibition at the Museum of Anthropology. And it's a beautiful cedar root basket that has a wildflower pattern of a shooting star on it. And this is a Secwepemc basket. And I think about this in terms of gathering our foods from the land, and how that is an expression of both Indigenous sovereignty, love for the land, and continuation and futurity in the land. And so this is an image of a graphic I did for Forest Foods, who worked with 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙀𝙀 Indian bands, 𝙤𝙤𝙀𝙀 community, to assert authority over the understory after the wildfires. So the understory being the berry bushes, the roots, in this case, morel mushrooms. And so there was a lot of harvest of these morel mushrooms, and they wanted to have a say on how that impacted the land. And so they created this partnership, and I created this graphic of this cedar root basket holding these morel mushrooms, which was used on the packaging. So there's some of the ways that this work is sort of integrated in my artistic practice. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from other esteemed panelists. So thank you, 𝙤𝙤𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Tanya. That was amazing. Great. Awesome. Shall we, Dawn, would you like to now present? And then can share your screen. Thanks, Tanya. I love that idea of the understory of the fires being these berries and morels. That is a really, really interesting and I know just beautiful way of putting that and how they emerge from these the acidity of what's left after the fire.
Yeah, absolutely, and the and the potential threat of commercial harvest of that, how it changes the relationship to those.
For sure. So Dawn, are you there? Oh, you're muted, Dawn. Dawn was going to be the next speaker. I'm not sure what's happened. But it seems like if anything's going to happen, this would happen today. Because so many things have happened in this way. There's Sherry. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, is Dawn coming on? I can't even see her anymore. Dawn, are you there?
She seems to be there, but as far as she's mute. Oh, there you are, Dawn. Hi. Hi, Dawn. That's
Sorry.
okay. That's okay. That was created a sense of, mystery and intrigue, anticipation. So are you ready to go?
Yes, I was going to share my screen, but that's why I got kind of tripped up here. I'm not quite sure why I can't share it. But
Dana, do you want to make sure that Dawn is a co-host? I think you are, but
yeah, I made you a co-host. Check now if you can share the screen. It should be a green share screen button in the middle of the screen down there.
yeah, okay.
And then
it's more the view that I'm having a problem. I've done this, I don't know how many times. Why I can't do it now is another story. But I'll just share it like that when I'm ready. But for now, I'll just start talking because I wasn't going to show the screen through the whole thing anyways. So thank you for inviting me to this amazing group of beautiful souls that are doing some really amazing work that Tanya, Sherry, Lisa, Amy, Dana, thank you for your work on all of this. And I've seen quite a few names in the group that I recognize and a lot that I don't recognize. And so I'm especially grateful for the title and the deep meaning of MIIJIM. Did I say that correctly, Amy?
well, MIIJIM.
MIIJIM? Okay. MIIJIM. Okay. I've always been so blown away at how deep the understanding is of Indigenous peoples that I've worked with over the last 15 years as the founder and curator of the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty, and traveled to many Indigenous nations across so-called Canada, where I am aware that there are 98 nations of Indigenous peoples across the vast imperialistic scale in which the nation state of Canada asserts false jurisdiction. As sovereign Indigenous peoples, we know that we can't achieve food sovereignty without land and without making visible our place on this land. And so in the title of the topic, when you said food sovereignties, I really appreciate that, because food sovereignty, from what we've come to learn in the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty, it is a very imperialistic term. It's the English language, and we use it because it gets a lot of attention. It's been, the term itself as many of you probably know, was introduced into the World Food Summit back in the 1990s. And it's defined by the global food sovereignty movement that is dominated by a peasant farming narrative and an agrarian narrative, which isn't necessarily inclusive all the time of the hunting and the fishing and gathering, which is how we've come to understand how food sovereignty is expressed in so-called Canada. So in addition to 98 nations of sovereign Indigenous peoples, we're aware that there's about 2/3 of all of the Indigenous peoples in both Canada and I think I can safely say across Turtle Island are hunters and gatherers. That narrative has been made visible in the Western science-based techno-bureaucratic framework for agricultural research and development. And it was done systematically as a form of oppression at least in BC, in the westernmost province of so-called Canada, is only recent. So agriculture was first introduced back in the late 1880s here, and in the BC's first agricultural center, Langley Fort, known as Fort Langley back then. And that was at the same time that Canada was establishing the Indian Act, the Grand Disenfranchisement Act, the Civilization Act, and then later in BC, the BC Land Act, which was actually struck down by the duty of disallowance because it didn't honor the treaty and the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which was the conversation with the Crown back at the time. And so when we look at land as being such an important part of sovereignty and food sovereignty, I just always like to kind of put that up front and appreciate that it is sovereignties, because it's hugely diverse. And what I share, I don't profess to represent all Indigenous peoples. Even within my own nation, there's a huge diversity, especially with the influence of colonial systems of governance and economy and culture. The influences of that have, created a lot of tension and division. And so really, I represent here as a 𝙤𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙀 woman who has been entrusted by literally of thousands of Indigenous peoples across Canada who have come to our work over the years and shared their knowledge, their wisdom, their values, and their deep, deep strategies. Indigenous peoples, our way of knowing it transcends the Western science-based, the reductionist mindset of Western science. That is really good at reducing things to simpler terms and understanding it at a molecular level, to where I guess an example I can use of that is quantum science that is catching up to understanding the transformative way of knowing of Indigenous peoples everywhere that I've ever spoken to. The underlying epistemology, the underlying pedagogy, the way of knowing is through ceremony, is through transformer and trickster stories, and a lot of our languages and the way that they're visceral and very verb oriented very much speak to that transformative way of living the reality of food sovereignty, as opposed to conceptualizing it in an abstract framework for policy planning and governance. So this is really fundamentally, I think, important to understanding what I've come to develop in terms of decolonizing the food system and thinking about the way that interfaces with art. And I always appreciate Tanya's work and the work of other artists who over the years have given me an opportunity, especially within one of our projects, which is the Wild Salmon Caravan, which was a project that was, pardon the pun, spawned out of a strategic think tank that myself and a language teacher and leader in my home community, Dr. 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙠 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙀, we organized a strategic think tank in our territory on the banks of the Adams River, which was once one of the largest salmon spawning grounds in the entire Fraser Basin, has now been reduced to literally hundreds. So we organized a bunch of activists and lawyers and fisher people, academics, to come to a think tank and help us think into what do we do? Like we take our role as, especially women, of the headwaters of not just the Adams, but the Fraser Basin, really seriously. And that was traditionally our role. So in brainstorming and reflecting on how our ancestors would mobilize people, reflecting back on the Canadian Constitution Express, where the late Grand Chief George Manuel and many other leaders across the country organized their people and rented a train and went to Ottawa and had Aboriginal title and rights entrenched into Section 35(1) of the Canadian Constitution, looking at the child caravan of the 1970s or 60s. And so we said, well, let's call it the Wild Salmon Caravan. And so myself and Stalo elder Eddie Gardner have gone around for the last 4 or 5 years to organize communities and mobilize knowledge and mobilize networks, celebrating spirit of wild salmon through the arts and the culture. Because we know that that creative energy of art and ceremony and culture, those transformative ways of knowing, will transform the darkness surrounding the industrial storm killing wild salmon, but not just wild salmon, many of our indigenous foods that are being impacted by that productionist, reductionist mindset, resource extraction kind of model of economy. So I have a framework that I'd like to share with you, but I want to check in on my time here because I want to be careful. I can easily go over time, and it happens often. How am I doing for time, Lisa?
You can, I think you have a few more minutes to talk about the framework if you want.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I will just share my screen.
Thank you.
Just bear with me. Hopefully I can do that without too much confusion. Okay. Where is it?
Do you see that green?
I'm going to make it easy. Okay.
Do you see this, the share screen button at the bottom? And then when you click that, another screen will come up. It'll look like a bunch of rectangles, and then you just hit, I think, accept or present or something like that.
Yeah, I got it.
Cool.
I just had to find the file. Okay. So this is a framework. And so I want to say to you that Sherry and I, first time I met Sherry, we went to South Africa together on a cross-cultural learning exchange with Indigenous fisher peoples in South Africa to learn about how they've been having their fishing rights recognized since the end of apartheid. We learned about how the system of apartheid in South Africa was actually developed and modeled after the reservation system in Canada, and there's history and there's a book written about it. So when I learned about the work that they were doing over there, I borrowed some of the terminology that went into this framework. This framework is it was designed to give structure and some tools and some terminology to go through a process of decolonizing food system and to create ethical spaces of engagement or cultural safety for Indigenous peoples who often carry the burden of increasing understanding of our culture and our way of our narrative of hunting and gathering and fishing, and how that transcends beyond the agriculture-centric narrative or system of policy, planning, and governance that dominates. And that often makes us, erases us, and which is what it was designed to do, essentially, based on the notion of terra nullius and the doctrine of discovery. So this is very much a process-oriented tool. It's a circular process. It uses the metaphor of the life cycle of wild salmon. And it goes through a process of, first of all, starting at the conceptualization egg stage in the East. The key points of entry is the terminology we use to understand the different realities that are being expressed in the food system. So that can be contextualized in any point of entry. We could be talking about model of economy. We could be talking about land policy. We could be talking about cultural strategies, and many, many, many other ways that it could be contextualized. We could say that one reality is through an agricultural narrative or a production paradigm, or we could contextualize another reality, the Indigenous reality, as hunting, fishing, and gathering, and more of a regenerative paradigm. Once we understand the different ways of expressing reality, that we then move through the circle, go around the circle, and move to better understand the ways that the different realities interface. And they can interface in either contentious ways or complementary ways. And it's really important that we truth at this stage what is contentious and name it. Because often with the work that we've done in food systems, in discourse within food systems policy and planning and governance, is we've often just not been able to actually get into it deep enough to name the contention. But it's also important to see there is a big movement of like a regenerative food system movement happening, and a lot of that work is complementary. So once we understand the contention, though, that is where the transformation happens, and that's rather than running from that or trying to silence that. We look at that and we say, well, what are the contradictions that live? And this is where we get into the transformer worldview and the teachings of Indigenous stories and cultures that teach about, like through the Secwepemc way, we have Coyote, who is the transformer. And Coyote often teaches through his own bad behavior. He teaches us morals and ethics. So there's contradictions that he teaches through, and it's really important to identify the contradictions and the paradoxes. And when we identify the paradox, we can then ask a Coyote question or a wicked question. There's often no answer or no way to solve that question, but it's very, just being in that space is very transformative. And we can often identify things we don't know because it's a paradox. So there's often gaps in knowledge, and that can lead to charting a critical pathway of research and development to take us in a whole new and innovative direction. Once we identify the gaps, we can then identify potential for change and strategies. And so it's a non-exhaustive process, and it's quite a bit different from Western science in the respect that it is new, and it's leading to systems change. And so that's it in a nutshell. And I won't say too much more because I really don't want to take up anymore. I really want to hear what Sherry has to say too, and I'm just grateful for the time to share that. We will be using that to contextualize the opening and closing plenary of the upcoming Food Secure Canada gathering happening on November 11th to 17th. So we hope that you will join that gathering, because after the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty joined with the Executive Director of Toronto Food Share, Paul Taylor, in the Food Secure Canada Assembly in 2018, we led a boycott and to dismantle structural racism in Food Secure Canada and the way that we were being censored and erased. That organization has since restructured their whole board and agreed to make the focus of this gathering on Black and Indigenous and people of color, and looking at that decolonial anti-racist work. So we're leading that kind of work in other parts of the country too, but that's going to be an upcoming one where hopefully people on this call can participate. So stay tuned.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's a great, Dana posted the foodsecurecanada.org website in the chat, and that's a great segue into Sherry's presentation that we're all wanting to see, hear from Sherry. So, and there's lots of thanks in the chat there for you, Dawn. So I also thank you. Sherry, how are you doing? Are you ready?
I'm hanging in there.
No, so am I.
For those
happy to have you here. So over to you.
Yeah, for those of you who've just that have joined us, aside from the technological problems, I thought the format was going to be somewhat different and prepared quite different. So I don't have a big presentation, and we'll just do a little bit of storytelling here, and some of this may be repetitive to you. But first of all, let me say how honored I am to sit here with these women. And Dawn and our work has crisscrossed throughout the years. In fact, she hosted over about 10 years ago, hosted a Canadian Learning Network, international network within your community. And so I'm just really greatly honored. And I want to thank Amy, because with all the chaoticness, as we all know, these things can go sideways, not as we planned. But thank Amy for really grounding me. And so anyways, I don't have a lot of visuals, but this beautiful visual in the background is from my home community. And it's from a couple of years ago, and it's preparing for our Harvesters Feast. And we're just gearing up for it. It's been quite altered this year due to many reasons. The person, Councillor Carol Ann, who usually organizes this and put her heart and soul into this, has just taken a break. And a couple of the other harvesters are going to try to coordinate that this year. And due to COVID, it'll probably be shorter. Usually we have a 4-day Harvesters Feast. Anybody can drop by from outside the community, inside the community, and probably get a meal at any time. And when I say Harvesters Feast, we're honoring all our hunters and gatherers, fishermen, fisherwomen, and beautiful food that's served throughout. And it's just a way to honor them, because we try, it's been a struggle, but we really try to ensure that our food sources is shared with everybody in the community. And it's interesting how much of this kind of overlaps with Dawn and Tanya, because I too, Dawn, really love the plurality of food sovereignties. And a lot of this has to do with honoring other Indigenous communities, but also honoring our ancestral homelands and our unceded ancestral homelands. And it's just very important to note that those ancestral homelands go way beyond the reservation boundary. We were put on reserves, and our ancestral homelands are so much more than that. And that's why we honor our harvesters, and there's a lot of bravery involved, courage involved to still continue to harvest those foods, particularly in today's context, which I might come back to if I get a chance. And so basically, for those of you who know me, my work started out with fishing, and that's because we had won this wonderful treaty right to earn a moderate livelihood based on the peace and friendship treaties, which I hope to come back to here in a moment and in a little bit, but Donald Marshall Jr. case in 1999. And because of the violent backlash that we experienced at that time from settler society, the commercial fishers, from government, from industry, and so forth. Forgive me, we're going through this again and right now. But because of that and the way that those treaty rights were interpreted, my community had little voice. And I think some of you heard the story. And so we had to find a way to have our voice, find a way to figure out what for us, what that court decision had meant. And a lot of this has to do with, that carries on 21 years later, is it's one thing to win something into the court, and this was the Supreme Court of Canada decision. It's quite another the way that is interpreted and how that's implemented. And unfortunately, there seems to be a watering down of our inherent rights, our treaty rights, to just mere commodities. And this is what's so problematic. And in the course of how those court decisions are interpreted and negotiated, and negotiations that are state-driven in general, there's a lot of people excluded. And a lot of this has to do with issues about consultation, because the buck seems to stop at the leadership, and there doesn't seem to be no mechanism in that process for consulting with the broader membership. And what happens, you have women that are excluded, you have two-spirited people excluded, you have gender diverse people excluded from that process that have no say in that process. And so for my community, we started out, like, what I was interested was because there was no space for us to voice our concerns. There was no space. So how do you go about providing that space? And I don't know, I'm hoping she's on. I'm quite sure that we were very fortunate early on. And I'm going to date her and myself a little bit, because my daughter, I think, was about 4 or 5, and she's now going on 22. We ran across this researcher named Martha Stegman. And it's been a journey. We still connect, and we've done some work and hoping to carry on some more work. I get a little bit emotional about that, because she's one of the few researchers that came into our community and stayed, didn't go anywhere. So didn't mean to get emotional about that, Martha, but anyways. So anyways, I started working with her, and we did a participatory film to provide my people with a voice. And that film has been shown worldwide in defense of our treaties. And we also did a second film together We Story the Land, where my community was working to restore these ancestral canoe routes. So anyways, that leads into some of the research I did, and I thought, well, what is this? Because the dominant narrative, as Dawn was speaking about, you hear a very different narrative. Rather, it's about the Trans Mountain pipelines, about mining, fishing, and so forth. It's quite a different narrative. And where's these other voices? What is the Indigenous concept of treaty rights? What is the Indigenous concept of inherent rights? What does that all mean? And so I went on a research journey that starts out with fish. And my community tells me, look, you're not going to understand treaty rights unless you go moose hunting. So I went on a moose hunt. and quite a story about it. And it changed, it really changed my life, because for both of those, fishing and moose, this is like, to practice those was long struggles of resistance, that we owe it to ancestors who have struggled since colonialism began. All of those people, including Donald Marshall Jr. himself, who took this on and took the legal system on to even have those rights. And moose hunting for us is very valuable, because we had to fight so tooth and nail to not be included in a lottery system, in a sports hunting system, to win back that right, to restore our right to hunt for food. And so when I went on that moose hunt, and what I learned about from all of that research was that, you know, our conception of treaty goes so far beyond just a commodity. It goes so far beyond an economic right. And I think Lisa, when she was introducing, Dawn talked about those 4 pillars, and there was such a spiritual element that I would not be able to convey here. It was just extraordinary, the amount of cooperation, collaboration, relations, offerings, and ancestral, you know, calling on the ancestors, calling on loved ones that had passed on. It was just such a phenomenal experience. And so it came to the conclusion that, you know, treaty is food. Former Chief Frank Mew says treaty is not a noun, it's a verb. And so it's such a broader concept of what a treaty right would be, or inherited right would be. And so currently now, this is bringing me to the exclusion of women and two-spirited, or 2SLGBTQQIA, that says, expressed in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Final Inquiry Report, about the exclusion of them from governance processes, and their stories of you know, their roles in food and so forth. And it's very heroic, considering that when it comes to facing pipelines, when it comes to facing mining, when it comes to facing this neoliberal or this big, huge economic development that that we're often excluded from those negotiations, it's women that are basically on the front lines. And so basically my current work involved bringing 2 groups of women, the Wolastoq, the people of the beautiful river, or known as Maliseet, that were fighting Sisson mine, and together with Mi'kmaq women that were fighting against this Alton gas cavern thing, where they were going to dig out these salt caverns, throw the salt into this river that's been traditionally the highway for the 7 districts, and store natural gas in these caverns. And why I bring that up, because a lot of that work, and as Dawn and Tanya know, there's a criminalization for standing up for that, against that type of development. And so this has led to me still trying to find space for women to tell their stories. We were supposed to have a conference, but we ended up doing a digital story project, which will be hosted by our partner Kairos on the Mother Earth Resource Extraction website. We partnered with them. They're fantastic to partner with. And this is sort of where I'm at now. And, you know, and I talked a little bit about the treaty rights interpretation, and I'll just kind of end with this, is that I was very fortunate to be on a phone call yesterday with a beautiful elder. And she basically was telling us about treaty making here. It's a little bit different than the modern treaties and so forth. But the treaty making here, we have these five essential chain of treaties. And basically starting in 1725-26, and it was renewed throughout time and so forth. And she basically, her and I had this conversation about how, you know, there was so much more behind those treaties than the paper that they were written on. our settler mind or colonial mind will go automatic, well, what does it really say? And that's the legal mind. But what is missing is the stories behind that of how many days people met. And it wasn't the chief and council as we know it. It was big discussions in those communities about who can best represent us on this. And the peace and friendship treaties, these pre-Confederation treaties, were to bring people together, peace and friendship. And she reminded that we did not succumb to colonial oppression. We were allowing them to be here on the grounds that they were to peacefully coexist here. And there's a lot of evidence for that, for like, I mean, Governor Cornwallis couldn't leave Citadel for 3 years because the Mi'kmaq was such a strong military force. And so that was our offering and the building of, you know, even the foundation of Canada, if you will. And so it took us 250 years to have those treaty rights acknowledged, and it's 21 years later. And as those of you who have known me from the fishing days, fighting for the fishing rights, we're reliving that nightmare right now. And we're reliving it. You're seeing across media, or hopefully if you're not, to tune in about how a community, 𝙬𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙬𝙠 has been trying to exercise a moderate livelihood to the fishery, which is what the court says, and the racism that we have faced with that is just really very difficult to hard to take. And even during COVID, and it's just something that we really have to wake up, because we've been trained to think of our natural resources in terms of commodities, and there's so much more than that. So I'll just, you know, that's it in a nutshell. I could talk more, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sherry. Thank you so much for your presentation and going into the idea of what was mentioned at the beginning is this idea of a regenerative, and I think, you know, thinking about value and thinking about food in terms of well, outside of the thinking of it in terms of life and health, rather than beyond life and health, but those are sort of the terms I'm thinking through, and then protect productivity and economic gain. So I'm just like, so I think we can just have some conversation here. I was going to open it up with a question to get things going, unless somebody has one of you has a question for each other to get started. I would be open to that as well. So it'll give me a moment to think about that, but okay, maybe I'll just get things going. So I named this session, and you mentioned it in some of your presentations about Indigenous food sovereignties, the plural, because thinking about Indigenous food sovereignties as a kind of relative to our context and our places in the world, or our nations as well. Can you talk about what is important and distinct about a food that you're in relation with? And I know you did touch on that, but if you could talk about that in your, like how you've been in relation to that food and how that relates to a specific, you know, where you're working from. Anybody, Dawn or Sherry or Tanya?
I'm happy to share about a food.
Sure, that'd be great.
There's many, and it's hard to choose, but I often say if I had to choose only one, I would choose wild salmon. Wild salmon, at one time, well, there's actually a book about it written called The Most Harassed Fish in the World. And that book maps out all the places around the world where wild salmon used to exist. Wild salmon is one of the most amazing species. And when Sherry and I traveled to South Africa the second time, we went with the World Forum on Fisher Peoples and wrote a position paper for the World Forum on Fisher Peoples to position inland small-scale fisheries into the focus of that social movement, because it, prior to that, had only been focusing on marine fisheries. So I brought a case study of wild salmon there, and because it's a species that goes in all the way to the ocean, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles all the way to Alaska, and then back to the exact same stream that it was born in. It's an amazing life cycle. It's an amazing journey. For sockeye salmon, it's 4 years. So if we live to be 80 years old, we can watch wild salmon regenerate for 20 times in our life. So that's pretty amazing that one species can teach us, and what it teaches us about regenerating and life and death, and how it's important. It's our most important indigenous food for the 27 nations of indigenous peoples that live in so-called BC. But it's also food for the bears, the eagles, the cedar trees. David Suzuki did research that shows that he found the genes of wild salmon in the tops of cedar trees. It cycles huge amounts of nitrogen isotopes through the forests, the fields, the waterways. So it's a keystone species, and it's quite amazing, actually. I've been noticing my health decline over the last few years because I can't eat as much wild salmon. I had it for breakfast this morning because my comrade Janice 𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤𝗫𝗍𝗫, as a way, like, always honors me every year, and her son Sean Billy is a fisherman in Statlim territory on the Fraser, one of the oldest fishing villages on the Fraser, and they gifted me with a dozen of small jars of canned salmon from this year. But given how low the numbers are this year, you know, when I eat that, I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, it's almost an emotional experience, because we know that it's like every morsel must be upheld as a sacred responsibility. We eat that salmon, it becomes us. The salmon comes from the water, it comes from the land. Therefore, we are of that. We cannot be separated. It is our relative. It's not just a resource to be exploited to an external means, the way the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the capitalist economy manages it as a resource. And I'm like, how can you call that a resource? It's you, it's us, we eat it. And when we don't have it, we become sick. And we're seeing a lot of chronic diseases and an epidemic proportion of chronic gut conditions and liver problems and poor nutrition. Like, for, you know, living in a first world nation state like Canada, we shouldn't be suffering from poor nutrition. But as Indigenous peoples, we experience that at three to four times the national rate of the average Canadian in terms of food insecurity. And food insecurity for us is measured by the quality of food, not just the quantity of food. So I'll leave it at that, because, but I think that's what's inspired the Wild Salmon Caravan, because I think wild salmon challenges us to work in complexity, which the system of colonial policy, planning, and governance is unable to deal with. A reductionist mindset, a production paradigm is not able to deal with complexity. It's able to deal with linear mathematical models, but we need to reconnect the system and go beyond the monocultures of the mind, as the world-renowned Vandana Shiva writes about in her book, that the system and how fragmented it is. So that's my offering, that about a very important and sacred Indigenous food, wild salmon.
Thanks so much. That's great. And Tanya or Sherry, do you want to chime in, or do you want to, do you want to chime in on that? I think.
I mean, oh, go ahead, Sherry, please.
No, you go ahead.
I was simply going to add, like Dawn said it so well, you know, a ditto, I think. You know, there's many foods I feel like I'm in relationship to and that I'm learning about that are traditional foods for our community. I live in an area with a lot of 𝙬𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤. It's a traditional root food, and it grows in large areas. It's a yellow flower that blooms in the early spring. But I think we just can't, we can't underestimate the importance of our wild salmon right now. I think that Dawn said it all. They're a keystone species. They're our heart, they're our spirit, they're our relations, and they're calling upon all of us to act now against the threats against them.
Okay, 𝙤👐. Okay, Sherry, did you want to chime in there? Or?
No, that's good. That's
okay.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering if we could, maybe I can ask people to ask questions in the chat. If you have some questions, we can check them out. It might not have a lot of time to go because we did start a little late, so I do apologize, but definitely it would be good to have to see what your questions are and your curiosities out there. If not, if we're not able to address them today, maybe it can continue the conversation through in the future. And speaking of the future, I'm thinking about if any of you are noticing or seeing initiatives that are inspiring, that are encouraging to you, that you see happening around you or across the country, that relate to food, relate to the sort of regenerative food systems, and maybe you would like to talk about them and kind of talk about what you see that offering to us.
There's something I just recently learned about. It's not my project. You know, this was a difficult question in so many sense because, well, I won't get on COVID. There might be another question pertaining to that. But one of the positive things that I've noticed was with the Indigenous students at Dalhousie University, which I just joined in July. And I was just so shocked to see this, that with the, what's it called? The Dalhousie Student Union Sustainability Office, that they're offering monthly cultural food boxes and it's a way to assert food sovereignty on campus, and they're offering that to students, Indigenous staff, and faculty. And I'm very curious to what's in those they call them cultural food boxes. And I thought, what an innovative way, because for any of those of you who like me, that I'm home, I know Dawn can relate to this. I'm my home, and then sometimes I'm in the city. And then when you're sometimes working in the city, and particularly in academia, it can become such a lonely, isolated experience. And just to have those traditional foods sometimes can just, I don't know, it's just spiritually filling for me, and I don't get so lonely so more. You know, I can't quite cook it the way the grandmas cooked it, or, you know, and so forth. But anyways, I just thought that was such an inspiring thing. It just did my heart good to see that.
Yeah, I think that but I think that really connects into the question about also making a point of like, how do, you know, if we don't have access to, you know, what we call maybe culturally, you know, cultural foods, or some people call them country foods, or if we don't have access to that, if we're in like urban centers, or we're just far away from, you know, it's more common actually that people are kind of cut off from that. You know, I think those are really important initiatives. But if there's any other ideas of how you've seen people be able to
well, if I can just add to that, because
yeah.
I when I teach, and I have students who live off reserve in urban centers, on reserve, and in different contexts. And, you know, I just got done reading this piece. Oh, I can't think of her name right now. Oh, I'll look it up here in a minute. But she talks about, yeah, I had this. She talks about, 𝙤𝙤𝙙𝙬𝙤𝙤. 𝙤𝙤𝙙𝙬𝙤.
Oh
And
yeah,
yeah,
she works at York. Yeah.
these trickster stories about reconciliation and land acknowledgements. And what I found so powerful in this piece that I read, she speaks about how land acknowledgements actually relegate Indigenous peoples to the past. We do these land acknowledgements, but somehow that's sort of in the past, and it becomes sort of tokenistic. And she says, and what you do about that, it's like, when you do that, you're not acknowledging the existence of Indigenous people there. And so you make them landless just because they're in an urban center, and it's storyless, that they don't have no stories, and you're separating them from being in the city. And I found that very, very powerful and something to be cognizant, because I do know here in the city throughout the years, there's been coordination of making sure moose meat gets in, or somebody has a connection with somebody else and so forth. And the Friendship Center here, the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center here, does have throughout the year, you know, traditional food feast and so forth to ensure that. So anyways, I just found that very powerful, and something that I have to be cognizant of when we do these land acknowledgements. And so, and also I want to acknowledge the Indigenous people that are here now. And I think 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Simpson has done some work. I'll never be able to pronounce it, but she does this beautiful animated, that's called still motion film. She's worked with a filmmaker to do this about, you know, trying to harvest maple syrup in the city, in an urban center. And it's such a beautiful piece. I really love 𝙤𝙤 Simpson's work. So I'll just leave it with that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really encouraged by a lot of growing that's happening in Toronto. A lot of different people are just sort of almost guerrilla gardening, but cultivating some, cultivating Indigenous plants, and that's another way that I see it manifesting in, in the spaces that we're often in these days. You offered some things there, Tanya, in the chat around 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Center. There's a bunch of things coming up in the chat, but.
Oh, sorry, that was just in direct response to a chat question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's all coming by really fast. So, any other thoughts about the sort of future? I guess I can look at some questions from the chat, and then there's some very long. Oh, okay. So, yeah, my interpretation of the questions is slow. So you're watching me stare at them. Oh, sorry, let me see here. Oh,
well, maybe,
okay.
Sorry, maybe I'll share that question, which was from Anne Fox. She was saying she's working on a land-based, and you were mentioning you're working on a land-based learning project with youth where elders share their knowledge and stories, and you gather, prepare, and share food together. You mentioned that you've had to move the project online due to COVID, and you're struggling with the symbolism, meaning, implications of trying to learn about traditional foodways through online learning. And she asked, has anyone else wrestled with this issue? And I just said, I think we all are, but I've seen some good work with the Shinta Center for Research and Technology in Denenda, the 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 First Nation, the work of Kelsey Wrightson, who's the ED, and Glenn Coulthard, who's the instructor, as well as 𝙤𝙤 Simpson, works together. And I think they've used some interesting models to continue their work, which is land-based knowledge gained through food harvest and knowledge of the land. And they've been able to continue some of that in person and some of it online. And I think we're all learning how to do that. I had proposed a cedar root basket workshop with here in the Bush Gallery. It's also had been delayed for COVID. I'm still trying to figure out how to do it because we need to protect our elders, and so there's no work with them other than online. That's true for language learning, and I think we're working on figuring it out. I think the important thing is elders have said they want to see that work still happen. And so we need to figure out how to do it safely.
Good. That's great. Thank you. Yes, and think about what we kind of draw from that work too. So, I mean, this is Dawn has to get going soon, and we are kind of at the end, near our ending point at 4:30. Some of the questions, if we could take note, there are a lot of great questions. So, but I know that Tanya wanted to offer to close the session with a song, and I do apologize we didn't get to as many questions and conversation, just some technical difficulties at the beginning, but we will make note, and hopefully you can be in touch with people here. And I'm really happy that we've had this opportunity to come together and talk about this Indigenous food sovereignties, as well as start kicking off this series, MIIJIM, Food as Relations. And Tanya, did you want to close things up with a song?
Sure, I just wanted to offer this. I asked Dawn in advance if she wanted to share this. We worked on it together. It's the outcome of an exhibition that was by Marianne Nicholson, 𝙬𝙬𝙬𝙬, including many other artists, myself included. And it was an exhibition at the UBC Belkin Gallery, which then traveled to the Kamloops Art Gallery. And we had a meeting of coastal Indigenous folks and Secwepemc community members to talk about wild salmon, talk about strategies of how to keep ourselves in the fight, keep ourselves seeing the joy of the future, of the return of the wild salmon, and to think about transformation. And so, members of the 𝙄𝙤𝙙𝙤𝙤 Nation were welcomed by members of our nation, the Secwepemc Nation, at the Kamloops Art Gallery for a public panel discussion and a private meeting to discuss shared resolve and struggle to protect the lands and waters. And instead of minutes from that meeting, we wanted to pose the idea of creating a song as an Indigenous kind of response, that this song could carry some of the spirit of our meeting and maybe help in the future. And so we wanted to share this song, which is for those who defend the land, which is our, the source of our foods. So this Rainbow Warrior song was composed and performed by William Wasden Jr., who's Namgis, Daryl Dawson Jr., who's 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, Pam Richard, Anishinaabe, and Tara Willard, my sister, who's Secwepemc. And the song was meant to be shared. We did this with the intention of sharing it to support the warrior spirit necessary for all Indigenous land defense work being carried out on Turtle Island. So I'm going to share my screen with you and play the song. I think it has a short introduction. This is not a final video, but I wanted to share it here today to give us energy, especially when we're in these sit-down meetings. Energy for us moving forward. And my deep thanks to all of you who are committed and do this tireless work. And so I hope to offer this as energy towards that work continuing.
Tanya?
Yes.
Can I just add something about the song?
Please.
Yeah, the term Rainbow Warriors was actually inspired by our Decolonizing Food System Cross-Cultural Interface Framework, the holographic epistemology that underlies the framework, where we quoted an Indigenous Hawaiian scholar, Manilani Meyer, who did her PhD on the holographic epistemology, and how holograms are a metaphor for looking at, like a rainbow is a holograph. It depends on the way the light's shining on the water particle as to what color you see. And so the Rainbow Warriors is a metaphor for calling on people of all colors to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples as we mobilize to protect our most important sacred Indigenous food. And so I'm so grateful of the creativity of the composers who composed this song following that theme of the panel the discussion we had that day.
Yes, thank you, Dawn. That's an important addition, and many people contributed. Dawn was there, members of Tiny House Warriors, elders Mike Carnoose and Your Mother, Dawn, Gary Godfredson earlier shared songs. So it was really a group of us. So I share this song in that spirit. Oh, apologies about the loading here.
Tanya, there's no sound.
Oh no, really? There's no sound? Give me one moment. It may be because, sorry, I have these earbuds in. Give me one moment. I think that what this
That's
does
probably
is,
it.
yeah, sorry.
Can I also post the link?
Let's see. Please let me know if you hear this now.
Share the link in the chat too so people can check it out. Yep, we hear it.
Sorry, I'm just trying to stop the share now. It's giving me a stall.
Thanks so much, Tanya, for sharing that. I'm glad it worked out that we could hear it. So that
froze my computer now.
That brings us for thank you for everyone coming, and Amy, you're still here. I don't know if you want to have any words at the end here, but no pressure. I'm really thankful for everyone coming, and really good questions I want to make note of so that we can connect again.
Yeah, I can just offer some final words and post
Okay.
it.
Pretty much.
So once again, I want to say 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤 and that gives great thanks to the organizers for bringing these important conversations and awarenesses to the forefront. And it's especially important to think now as we move here in the Northern Hemisphere into the resting time, that we give gratitude and thanks to Mother Earth for her generosity, and for all those plants and animals that have grown and shared their bounty and shared their generosity with us over the growing season. And moving into the rest time, we put our minds to our mother, who quite often needs our support and our love as she goes into her resting time. And we look forward to that blanket that is going to help her and support her while she's rejuvenating herself and taking a much needed rest. We say 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤 to Mother Earth 𝗂𝘄𝑔 for once again sharing with us that nurturing energy. And we say 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤 to all of you for taking the time out to learn and to share with us here. We say 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤 especially to those land defenders who are standing up for the work that we all need to do to understand how we are connected and how to work in harmony with the natural world, with our relatives out there, the water beings, the crawlers, the four-legged, the plants and animals, the sky beings. We say 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤 to all of those that have brought those teachings forward and those awarenesses, and are defending those ones who can't necessarily do that for themselves. You know, we say 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤 to you, and we look forward to seeing you again. And we ask 𝗄𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤 once again to watch over us as we go about our day, and that may we safely arrive to our next destination. And we as we go about our day, we say 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤, 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤, 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙬, and kind of get on my relations.
All right, 𝗂𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙤. Thanks. Take care, everybody.
Mama.
Mama P.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.